en un lugar de La Mancha, de cuyo nombre no quiero acordarme.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good
Aujourd'hui,
fortune
maman est morte. Ou peut-être hier, je ne sais pas.
Well, good afternoon. Our final program today is going to examine more closely an issue that has come up throughout the morning, which is artificial intelligence. And we'll be asking how we can establish an international standard for labeling AI narration. And to do that, I want to welcome Jon Watt. Jon Watt is Business Development and Business Audio Director at Bonnier Books UK, where he has developed the company's audiobook and podcast strategy and overseen the rapid expansion of that division. He's also president of the Audio Publishers Group, part of the UK's Publisher Association, where he has led the effort to establish international naming conventions for AI-narrated audio products. Jon, welcome.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you as well to Javier and Luis, because this is fantastic. This is really fantastic. Like, so many people up here today, starting with Amanda, have talked about double-digit growth in audio. And we're seeing it across loads of countries, yet how many audio-focused conferences are there? There really aren't that many. So this is rare and very special. And we've just had children's and library and great talks from people on lots of different subjects, which are so important to everything we're trying to do in this industry. So thank you so much for organising this. It's really appreciated. I'm here to talk to you about AI narration labelling, which is absolutely critical to our industry right now. And over the next 15 minutes, and I really need to make it 15 minutes because I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, I'm aware of that. I'm going to try and explain why I think it's so critical to our industry right now and what we can do about it. So, synthetic narration is, of course, nothing new to our industry. I'm not going to do a poll of when you think it started, because I saw how Amanda fared earlier. But we had early rudimentary text-to-speak in the 70s, as early as that. And it really took off in the 2000s. It took a leap forward with neural networks and deep learning evolved. And it marked that turning point in the development of text-to-speech. And more recently, by harnessing the power of AI and big data, synthetic voice models can now generate what we've all been talking about at these conferences for the last 3 years, which is highly realistic, expressive synthetic speech. And as I'm sure everybody here knows, the technology is improving at a faster rate now than ever before, with the result that it's becoming very difficult to keep up, even if you work in the industry, let alone if you're a consumer. And as the technology evolves, so must our terminology. And it hasn't. It really hasn't, not even close. We really haven't evolved our technology to keep up. And at present, terms for different kinds of AI narration are being used interchangeably across our industry and in different countries. So we've got digital voice, synthetic narration, cloning, replication. You know, what do they all mean? So it was against that background that we decided that we urgently needed to develop an international language that allows publishers, retailers, and most importantly, consumers to distinguish between the different types of narration out there. Consumers, and especially consumers, need to know what they're buying. This is so important. They need to know what they're buying. It's only through giving consumers the chance to make informed choice around AI-narrated products that we, as a whole industry here, can maintain consumer confidence in our products. And again, this has come up again and again today. We must keep consumer confidence high because quality is high. And that's all wrapped up in the same thing here, the quality. So earlier this year, it was widely reported in the media that there were over 40,000 AI-narrated titles on Audible. But this statistic only included those that were labeled in some way or acknowledged as being AI-narrated or had come through ACX. There are certainly many more than that which have no label at all. And how can we pick them out? So how can a consumer be confident in what they're buying? And how can we, as an industry, try and understand consumer attitudes to AI AI-narrated products unless their purchases, when they've purchased it, and they've purchased it with the full knowledge of what they're buying. The consumer has to know what they're buying in order to be able to tell us, and we can read through what they're buying, how they feel about AI-narrated products. Consumers will ultimately vote on AI narration with their money, their credits, their minutes, and their ears. And we'll only truly understand what they're telling us if we have labeled their products clearly in the market. So that's the backdrop, and it's against that backdrop that the Audio Publishers Group, of which I'm chair at the moment of the Audio Group, and that's part of the UK Publishers Association. We began working with the Audio Publishers Association in the States, which Amanda mentioned earlier, to bring together publishers on both sides of the Atlantic to discuss this crucial question of AI narration labeling. But we quickly realized that we could talk as publishers in a room, but what we needed, and what we really needed for it to be truly effective, was it needed more than just publishers. It needed the retailers, it needed the distributors, it needed the book management software providers, all in the room together, and this hadn't been done before. So we put out an invitation for people to come and discuss this, and we had an amazing response. We had over 50 companies coming from the UK, US, Canada, and across Europe. And together we had 2 highly productive meetings. Well, having said that, as audio people, you probably noticed that you put a lot of audio people in a room and they're actually not that talkative. It's remarkably silent for people in this profession. But we put them in a room together, and slowly we thawed, and thanks to a lot of incredibly skilled and knowledgeable people and experienced people, we established some guidelines towards what we think AI narration labeling should look like in the market, and how they should be classified and how these labels should be applied. So, what do these guidelines say? Well, firstly, it's important to stress that these are only guidelines. They're completely non-binding recommendations. They make no judgments on the uses of AI narration. They contain only recommendations on how publishers and retailers might name them and convey them in the most transparent and consistent way for consumers. We were looking for terms that would be easy for publishers and retailers to use and interpret, and for consumers to understand. So the first category the group identified was an AI-based synthetic voice that has been generated using samples from a large group of unidentified speakers. And the group proposed this title, this label of AI voice be applied to these. So,
Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry and Aunt Em. Their house was small. For the lumber to build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor and a roof, which made one room. And this room contained a rusty-looking cook stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds.
That is an example of what we would call an AI voice. You all recognize it? What's otherwise been called synthetic voice previously, we're calling that AI voice. That one was Google's auto narration Archie. The second category then is an AI voice. AI voices that have been generated using authorized or licensed samples from a specific human voice and seeks to replicate that voice. An example would be a publisher working with a deceased author's estate to create an authorized voice replica. This is with the express consent of the estate and based on archive samples of the author's voice. That's just an example of what might happen. Here is an example from somebody who's very much not dead. In fact, they spent 3 hours in studio creating the replica. So this authorized voice, sorry, I should say, the label we've applied to this is authorized voice replica or AVR. And the authorized is the key point here. This must be authorized by the person whose voice it is.
This story of a Victorian family business transformed and subsumed by international corporations in the era of global capitalism is a familiar one, and something that the publishing industry knows all too well. Short but sweet. That was, I'm not even going to tell you who did that or where it's from because I'm not here to advertise it, but I will tell you that
that was three hours in studio to make an entire audiobook that was then replicated from those 3 hours. And that is authorized voice replica. So replication is also sometimes referred to as cloning. However, when the group discussed this, it was thought that cloning brought some negative impressions, and it suggested that perhaps going forward, cloning would be more appropriately used for unauthorized replication, where a human has not been given permission for their voice to be replicated. Most AI voices also have identifying names, as that example of Archie from Google came. Often it's a single name. And we would encourage that use of a narrator or a reader to be used in the metadata as well, allowing consumers to easily identify these AI voices as they would with a human narrator. And as we know, with human narrators, people quite often follow a narrator. It's quite possible that in the future, maybe somebody likes the voice of the AI and wants to follow it, therefore we need to have an identifying name. So having established these two main types of AI narration, how might this information be effectively conveyed from producers and publishers to retailers, and then from retailers to the consumer? The first question the group wanted to answer here was when a producer or publisher should feel these labels would be appropriate. Should there be a threshold for how much AI narration in a title qualifies for it to have a label? Excuse me. This was an area we went back and forth on for a long time. But ultimately, the guidelines suggested that a narrator's voice is deemed to be AI voice or AI voice replica when it was the intention of the producer or the publisher to use synthetic or replica voice instead of a human narrator for whole or part of an audiobook. So the key word there is intention. Is the publisher intending to not use a human for the whole of it? And if that's the case, then a label should be applied. But there are some caveats here. As has been discussed, a lot of publishers are using and producers are using AI for pre- and post-production. And it can be hugely useful and convenient for pickups on human-narrated products. You've had somebody in the studio, you can't get them back. How are you going to do a pickup on a mistake that happened? And it's replication there is a way to do that. But should that then have to have a label telling the consumer that AI has been used? We discussed this quite a lot, and again, it was about intention. It wasn't the intention to replace the human with AI, therefore there should not be a label there. But if everybody needs, if a rule of thumb was needed, we thought that more than 10% of any of AI narration in any title would be a rule of thumb for applying a label. So these guidelines also feature a step-by-step guide for how a publisher or producer can express these labels through Onyx, a spreadsheet, or direct to retailer in their proprietary format, and how these fields within book management software or metadata portals can be evolved to reflect these labels. So here is How Do the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. And retailers will receive this information in the title's metadata, and ideally they then ingest it and display the corresponding naming convention, AI voice, AVR, authorized voice replica, in the narrator line alongside the narrator's name. So John Smith, AI voice. John Smith, AVR, if it was an AVR. That is the proposal. However, again, I have to stress, these can only ever be recommendations. We can't tell people how to label. It is a recommendation only. And it's up for each individual retailer to decide how to process and display the AI narration details conveyed in the title's metadata. And across the international picture, it will be different again. I've spoken with a lot of retailers about this, and they are finding solutions, but their solutions are slightly different each time. How they're going to use these terminologies, how they're going to label AI, and certainly in different languages, obviously the metadata has to be translatable. But the foreign retailers, so Spanish, Swedish, German retailers have discussed this, and there is an easy way to use the metadata to be able to convey that information. So one other element that the group felt was important to highlight was that should a retailer be uncertain whether a label has been applied correctly on a title, or that a replica voice may be unlicensed, then they should go back to the publisher and ask and seek clarification. This is an important step because it puts the onus on the publisher to label with honesty and clarity. The guidelines will also cover naming conventions for AI translation in audio. I won't go into that now, it has been discussed, but it's covered in the guidelines. These guidelines can be downloaded. It's on the APA website, which is the American Audio Publishers Association. It's also at publishers.org.uk. You can download it from there as well. And as with any guidelines, this will be an evolving document that will have to be amended and updated as technology moves on. And these guidelines can only be truly effective with cross-industry support and international support to bring out the best benefit. We hope that publishers and retailers come together now and adopt these naming practices and clearly convey them to consumers. Because this year, it's a good time to have this music actually, let's lift it up. So because this year, for the first time, the number of AI-narrated books produced is going to be greater than the number of human-narrated books. That's what is estimated, okay? So the time to instigate transparent labeling is not at the end of this year, and it's not when we meet next year here, it's right now. We have to get on this right now. So thank you all, and we'll do some brief questions before lunch.
Jon Watt, thank you so much for that. And when you had the meeting and you put this all together, you talked about the various stakeholders that were in the room with you, right? And while everybody there is also a consumer, you didn't have consumers themselves, and they're going to get the ultimate vote on all of this. And is there a potential, is there a concern of a kind of a boomerang effect? It's a bit like, food labeling tells you what's inside that box of cereal.
Yeah.
And when you read the list of ingredients, you say, I'm not going to eat that. So will labeling like this potentially concern the consumer, the reader, do you think?
Well, I think they're concerned at the moment. I think what we have at the moment is misinformation or no information. So
the lack of information is the issue.
we have no information at the moment for the consumer. And so it is about informed choice. They must be able to make a choice. And in fact, for us publishers, we need that feedback from the consumer before we can really make judgments on this. I think it's a really interesting concept that isn't discussed enough, which is, okay, so let's say there starts to be more AI-narrated products in the market, but the consumer feels that, they're okay, but they're not as good as human-narrated, but I'd be willing to pay a bit less for them. At the moment, our market does not have any flexibility in price. It's just not the way our market's set up. We have credit models, we have streaming models, we have subscription models. All of these have a fixed fee. Now, I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm just saying until we get feedback from the consumer, it's impossible to really know how the market's going to have to flex with this. We can't say, okay, you could pay $1.99 for this product as opposed to $7.99 because it's AI narrated. Now, is the consumer going to tell us what that wants? This has been said before, I think, but the consumer leads us very much. You can only lead them so far, and we must listen to the consumer. So the first thing is labeling, and then we listen.
Have you heard from authors about all of this? You spoke about the pickups and so forth. When there are narrators, not the authors themselves, are they concerned about this issue?
I think all the stakeholders. So I think authors, agents have all got a huge interest in this. Certainly, I can't speak really about what publishers do, but I could say that it would involving the agent and the author is important in these decisions, because again, it's about everybody being informed, and I think it's the lack of information that breeds concern more than anything. And I think people are right to be concerned, and it's only by having discussions like we had in this group to establish these guidelines that we can really start to have an open discussion around whether we want this or not.
Well, Jon, I have a final question, which is you mentioned the evolution from text-to-speech over the last several decades. How surprised are you at the quality that these AI narrators, the level of quality? How surprised are you, and where do you think this is going?
Gosh, that's more than a 1 minute 48 question, isn't it? It is. Okay, so I am surprised. The AVR that I played there, the replica voice, I thought, I've listened to the audiobook. It's not one of ours, but I do think it's pretty astonishing. And that improvement has happened. If I'd done that a year and a half ago and listened, it wouldn't be anywhere near that. Funnily enough, I think the synthetic voice has not moved on as much. And you could hear that, perhaps, we all appreciate that actually Archie's not moved on as much as you thought he might have, given the practice he's had. I'm surprised at that. Where will it go? I don't know. So certainly in the UK, there are some restrictions still with retailers on whether you can upload, whether they will accept AI-narrated products. And that, I think, is, at the moment, stemming the tide a bit. There are, as I said, still 40,000 on Audible, they say. But it's not as prolific as it might be when it opens up, if it opens up to all types of AI-narrated product.
Right. So the memo to Google is get Archie back in the studio, I think. Jon Watt with Audiobooks and the Publishers Association, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all for now. Our producer is Jeremy Brisky of Burst Marketing, and Rob Simon is our executive producer. The Spoken World covers the latest news in the global audiobook market and features exclusive interviews with audio industry leaders, analysts, and innovators. Learn more at spokenworld.media and subscribe on all major podcast and streaming platforms. I'm Christopher Kenneally. Join me again soon on The Spoken World.